Masechet Yevamot, Daf Kaf Bet. A lot of interesting topics today. We're going to finish off the discussion of paternal great aunts and then discuss Rabbi Chaya's 6 additional prohibited relations. Then we'll talk about converts. Can they marry any of these people that are considered adva? And then what about a non-Jewish child or a mamzer with regard to yibum? These will be in the next Mishnah, and we'll conclude discussion with various kinds of half sisters. So we begin with a case that we already started with yesterday, which was if a great aunt fall from his father's side, either his father's sister or his father's brother's wife. So again, the father's sister or father's sister-in-law, these are the ones that the Torah mentions biblically. So these would be the most stringent for one generation. The question here is, will we extend these down to yet another generation, not just an aunt, but even a great aunt? And so yesterday we saw, we argued that these are not mentioned in the Braita that we saw yesterday, the Braita that mentioned 8 different prohibited relations. It does not include this. So perhaps that we can infer that it's permitted because it's not on that list of prohibitions. But then we countered and says, Tana Vishier, we don't know if that list is comprehensive. Perhaps it's just a list of 8, but there are others that are left off. There's a general rule that if a list is not comprehensive, then that means it must have left off more than one item, because it's only if you list everything except for one, well, just write the one item, one more item, right? If you assume that it has an etc., it means that there are 2 or more items that it left off. So now we're asking, what else do we know for sure that baraita left off, that we can apply the principle that there's an etc. at the end, and there's many cases that are left off. And we answered, the Sheniyot Rabbi Chaya has a list of 6 more that we're going to see in a couple of minutes what those 6 are. So for sure, those are prohibited, and yet they're not on the list. So the list is not comprehensive. Therefore, we cannot derive from the fact that this is omitted from the list that it's necessarily permitted. Okay, so now we have an answer. Amemar permitted these 2 cases, a great aunt on his father's side or his great uncle's wife are permitted. Good. So we have that Pesach Halacha. But next, Amar leRav Hillel leRav Asher, Ledidi Chazia lisheniyot mor bered Rabbana. Uchtivan shitsare leisura. Rav Hillel asked a question to Rav Asher. I saw a list of secondary forbidden relations that Mor Bered Rabbana had. He is a 4th generation Amora in Bavel, and he had a written list, and on that written list were 16 various relations that are secondarily prohibited. This is very interesting for another reason of a question of, was Torah Shebe'al Peh ever written down? I mean, eventually it was, but when was it written down? For most sources, it seems that all of Torah Shebe'al Peh was in fact oral throughout the Tannaitic and even the Amoraic periods. But this would be an exception. It looks like from here that there is a written document of 16 prohibited relations that are part of Torah Shebe'al Peh. So this is interesting and an interesting data point for a source for the writing of Torah Shebe'al Peh. Okay. My love temane de matnita v'shit de Rabbi Chaya v'hanachtarte hashit sareh. Now we don't have this list right now, but let's try to count what was on it. Well, we know the Braita that we saw yesterday that had 8. And Rabbi Chaya, which we're about to see in a minute, has another 6. That's 14. But this list has 16. So what are the other 2? It must be these 2 cases that we are asking about, the great aunt and the great uncle's wife. And they're on this list of prohibitions. And therefore, we can infer that these cases are prohibited. That was Rav Hillel's argument. But Rav Asher countered, "B'litamich shibsareh havyan deha ika eshet achi ha'em min ha'em tefashinan leisura." He says, "Hold on, your count has something wrong in it, because there should be 17. The case of the mother's maternal half-brother, which is twice removed from the biblical case, and we discussed yesterday. It's not in the Braita of 8, and we concluded after a long discussion that it's prohibited. And so then you'd have to add that also, and it would be 17. And so your count of 16, there's something off of it no matter what. So we answer that. Ha la kashya hanachtarte de damyan lahadade kehada hashib lehu v'hashitzere. He says, no, don't worry about that. The two that we're asking about right now, right? These two, the great aunt or the great uncle's wife, those are 2 in 1, right? They're the same thing. Remember the mirror image rule, right? Whatever is prohibited in terms of a woman is also prohibited in terms of that man's wife. And so we're counting these as 2, and so now count these 2 as 1, and this together with the mother's maternal brother's wife, so that is another one. So we have 16 altogether. So we can count it. So now back to the original question. However you count it, the point is that these are included, and I saw it, and this says that they are prohibited. And so that would be a source that would be opposite of Amemad, who permitted it in this list. Amar le velitami hava ketiv lehetera mi hava samchat alayhu. And so Rav Asher answers. He says, well, hold on. Even according to you, let's say in this list it said explicitly that a great aunt is permitted. Would you have relied on this list? The Mor Bereh de Rabbana, mi hatim alayhu, was Mor Bereh de Rabbana's signature, or did he sign it on the bottom and authenticate it that this is in fact a true tradition that he said? And no, you don't have that. And so here also that they are included in the list of 16 for prohibition, and still it's not authoritative because his signature is not on it, and therefore we cannot rely on this list. And so therefore this argument is thrown out. And back to my tangent, I wonder if it's thrown out because it's a written list. When something is an oral tradition, then you say, I heard it from my teacher, or heard it from his teacher, or heard it from this person. And that chain of transmission is what authenticates that they in fact said it. Whereas something written, you put it in a drawer, someone comes 20 years later and finds it, you never know exactly where it came from. And because it doesn't have that direct oral tradition, handing off of authority from one sage to another, a written document is lacking that. And perhaps that's why this is an exception that, someone wrote down some notes to remember. So that might have been true that people had private written notes, but they are not part of the official tradition and cannot be relied upon to decide halacha. So that's the last word on it. And because this written list is rejected, we go back to Amemad, who permitted it, and that is the halacha lemaseh, Rambam, and others who permit a great aunt in marriage. All right, and that brings us to the next case, Taneh Rabbi Chaya. We mentioned already a couple of times this list of Rabbi Chaya's extra 6 prohibited relations, and this is what they are: Shelishi shebibno shebibito, a 3rd generation granddaughter, shebeben ishto shabat ishto sheniya, and also a 3rd generation of his wife's granddaughter. These are both called sheniyot. And also Revi'i shebehamiv shebehamoto sheniya. And what's now here called 4 generations regarding his wife's great-grandmothers are also prohibited, and these are called a sheniya. So here are Rabbi Chiya's 6 cases. If we have a man and his granddaughter from his son, or granddaughter from his daughter, both of these are prohibited. And a person's wife, right? Person's wife, wife's son, meaning she had from a different marriage. So her granddaughter from her son, or her granddaughter from her daughter. These are also sheniyot. And also, someone's wife's grandmother, either from her father or from her mother. Either way, they are prohibited to her husband. And these are Rabbi Chia's additions. Okay, so interestingly, what we're going to analyze just the language of this. These are called shilishi because 1, 2, 3 generations shilishi, and the last two cases are called revi'i, even though they're also 1, 2, 3 generations. So in these cases, the Gemara is going to answer that it's counting the wife as one step, right? This is one step, and then 2, 3, 4 steps. So that's why in these two cases are called revi'i, and in the first two cases it does not go with the wife, so it's just 1, 2, 3 steps. But that leaves open the question of how come in the middle two cases it calls it shilishi, even though it does go through the wife. 1, 2, 3, 4. It should be called 4. All right, that's what we're about to see. It was good to see it on the chart. Amar le Ravina le Rav Asher, ma yishena lemala dechashiv la leishto, u'ma yishena lemata de la chashiv la leishto. What's the difference regarding the first two cases where what's the difference between the going up, meaning the second two cases? The last two. What's the difference between the last two cases? That it does include the wife as one of them, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and that calls it a 4. And what's the difference between the middle two cases that go down, right? The wife's grand daughters, where it does not count the wife as one, because that's just called 3. And the answer is lema la de isura mekoach ishtoka ate hashiv la lemata de isura lav mekoach ishtoka ate la ka hashib. So the Gemara answers, when we're going up in previous generations, the prohibition is because of the wife. It's the wife's great grandmother, so then we count the wife. But when we go down in generations where it's not through the wife, so that's why we do not count the wife as one. So it's only 3. Except that only works for the first two cases, not for the second two cases. In the middle two cases, where it is because of the wife, it's the wife's great granddaughters, and so the prohibition does come on account of the wife, and yet the wife is not included as a step. It's only called shilishi. And the answer is since it already started talking about the case of him, his own granddaughter, so his wife was not involved here. It doesn't matter, and so therefore it's 3 generations. So since we're talking about his relation, so then we just continue calling shilishi even the next case when it does go through her, because we're going down here, down here, down here. So we put them all as shilishi. But when it gets to the next category of not going down but going up to one great grandmother, then it says, oh, wait a second, this only applies regarding wife, and so therefore we're going to count this as another step and calls it revi'i. Okay, and so that explains the style of these of Rabbi Chia's baraita. Good. Amar le Rav Asher le Rav Kahana. Sheniyot Rabbi Chia. Yesh lo nefsek or en lahem nefsek? Okay, important question. These secondary prohibitions of Rabbi Chia, does it stop there at 3 generations, or does it go on even more? Right? What if it was a great granddaughter or grandmother? Would we keep going even after that? And he answers, and we answer with a braita tashema. Damar Rav. We saw earlier that Rav had a statement that there are 4 relations that have an end. Only goes that generation and no further. And only those 4 cases. So we can infer from that from Rav's statement that only those 4 cases have stopped, but Rabbi Chia's cases would continue even prior and later generations. Or maybe not. Tana matnita tashema shilishi urbi'i shilishi urbi'in tefela dima meshilishi va'elach mirvi'i va'elach. And so perhaps when Rav said what he said, he was referring only to that baraita, the original baraita of 8. And that's what he wasn't referring to this list of Rabbi Chia, so we can't tell anything from Rav. Okay, now we have another Tashema that says this very baraita of Rabbi Chia says 3 or 4 generations. So that suggests 3 or 4 steps removed, right? Some cases are 3, some cases are 4. That's it, and not anymore. And we say, no, not necessarily. It could be that these, he mentions 3 and on and 4 and on. 3 is the, the second 2 generations is obvious. Those are basic laws, and he's adding 3, but he means even more. And so this is not resolved. We're not sure if the Bichiya's list is limited to those 3 generations or if it continues even more. Amar le Rava Rav Nachman. Hazi mor hay merabanan da'ata me'marava v'amar ba'u b'marava gazru sheniyot begerim or lo gazru sheniyot begerim. So we concluded Bichiya's additions, and now we're talking about the question of converts. And the question here is that we have these sheniyot, right? This whole list that we just mentioned. Does this apply to converts, right? To converts who come to Judaism, and they are related in these ways. Would they be prohibited or not? Okay, so let's see. Amar le hashta uma irva gufa ilav shelo yomru ba'in mikedusha chamura lekdusha kala lo gazru behu b'rabanan sheniyot mivaya. Okay, this is a very fundamental principle. When someone converts to Judaism, we consider them like a newborn. All their previous biological relationships are null and void legally in halacha. And so that means something very interesting. When someone was not Jewish, under the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach is included erva arayot. So a brother and a sister who are not Jewish would be prohibited from being with each other, even as non-Jews. But here's the paradox: once they convert, and now their prior biological relations are not relevant legally anymore in halacha, because they were born again. To use an expression that's been taken over by another religion, but is original to this Talmud here, right? So since they are like newborns, and therefore in halacha they are not related to each other. So from the letter of the law, 2 siblings, a brother and a sister who both convert, could actually marry each other. However, the rabbis say, no, that's impossible, because if we allow erva gufa, right, a brother and a sister, or any of the fundamental arayot that are in the Torah, if we allow that, then people will say, oh, look, they come from a place that's more stringent to a place that's less stringent. When they were not Jewish, the law was more stringent, and now that they converted to Judaism, they have less holiness. And that wouldn't make sense. Conversion should make them more holy, more prohibited, and not less. And so therefore, the rabbi said that that first level fundamental deoraita erva will be prohibited for converts. But that's it. They made a gezerah for that. But shiniyot mibaya. Well, now you're asking about shiniyot. No, the whole point of the prohibition for the Torah section was only that itself was d'Rabbanan, so there wouldn't go from higher to lower, and so therefore it would not make sense that they should be prohibited even with the secondary. And so according to this, the converts would be permitted to marry any of their secondary relations, like a grandmother. Okay, Amar Rav Nachman, Gerim ho'il v'atu li'adan nema behu miletam. And so now Rav Nachman says, now that you mentioned Gerim, I want to talk about yet another law regarding converts. Achin min ha'em lo ya'idu v'im ha'idu edutan edut. Okay, another place where being a close relative is relevant is being witnesses, right? 2 witnesses that are related to each other cannot testify. But let's say you have a brother and a sister who are both converted. So now, from the letter of the law, they're not related to each other. So Rav Nachman says, wait, if they have the same mother, then lechatechila, we're not going to accept it, because being have the same mother, that's for sure they have the same mother, right? Paternal relation is always iffy before DNA. So if they are from the mother, then it just doesn't look right, because we know that they are siblings. So lechatechila, you should not accept them. If they did already, then okay, b'diavad, we will accept them. If they are only half siblings from their father, then we'll allow them to testify lehatechila. In any case, they're converts and they have different mothers, so it's not even for sure that they are siblings. And so now they're converts and they're like newborns, so it's permitted. Good. Asra Nachman, Amemar Amar. Memar said, even if they are only maternal siblings, it's permitted because it doesn't matter. I know for sure that they are biological siblings, but that makes no difference. Now they are legally in halacha, they are not siblings, and therefore they can testify. Okay, how come regarding adayot, if they were going to be intimate together, you say no, we prohibit siblings and any of the deoraita from being together, but to testify we do allow them. What's the difference? And the answer is because that law has to be kept by everyone, right? Everyone has to they socialize and see each other, and everyone has to see it, and therefore it's easy for people to make a mistake. Now we're going to actually bring a second reason why the rabbis prohibited converts from Edva, which is that if someone sees, if someone should see two siblings who are converts get together or get married, they're going to say, oh, I guess that's allowed, and not realize that's only because they're converts. They're going to think it's allowed for people that were born Jewish, and so they'll make a mistake. And so that's what we have to make a gezerah. So gezerah is really for two reasons. Number one, so people don't make a mistake and think that for those born Jewish it's allowed. And second, because people shouldn't go from something that was prohibited to something that's permitted, and so a lower level of kedusha by converting. So that makes sense for conversion. Whereas testimony, who accepts testimony? A bet din. A bet din is going to know the law, and they're going to know there's a difference between someone born Jewish and someone who converted, and so they can accept testimony from siblings who are converts, and they're not going to get mixed up and think that if they're born Jewish, then siblings are also okay. And here is the general principle that we've been assuming all along, but here's the first time it actually says it, that someone who converts is like a child who is just born, and therefore, of course, biologically they are still siblings, but this is a legal status. Their legal status in halacha is that they are not actually related to each other. We begin the next Mishnah. Mi sheyesh lo ach mikol makom zokek et eshet achiv liyibum ve'achiv hu lechol davar chutz mimei sheyesh lo ach min hashivcha umin hagoya. So any kind of brother, a paternal brother, would require if the person dies, one of the brothers dies, then his wife will be required to perform yibum, even if, no matter what the type of paternal brother it is. The Gemara is going to ask, what is this type? What is this including? It's going to answer, it's including even a brother who is a mamzer. Okay, in other words, their father had a legitimate child with his wife, and then he also had a child through adultery. So they are paternal brothers, and yet one is a mamzer. Nevertheless, yibum will fall to the mamzer. And they are brothers for all matters. I was going to ask, what do you mean for all matters? Even for inheritance, so on. And the only exception to this is someone if the father had a son from a maidservant from a non-Jew, then that child is considered not Jewish, and therefore, if the Jewish legitimate brother dies without children, the non-Jewish biological brother does not perform yibum, and the deceased wife the Yevamot can go free. Because the brother is not Jewish, so he cannot perform this Jewish law. Good. That's regarding the brother. Now, regarding the son. If someone dies and has no child at all, then you do yibum. But if he has any child at all, mikol makom, we're going to say this is going to include even a mamzer. Still is a child, although it's a problem, still is the person's child, and you can't say that they died without children, and therefore his wife does not perform yibum. There is a special prohibition. You can't curse or hit anybody, but there's a special prohibition that's chayav mitah for hitting and cursing one's parent. Well, what about a mamzer, right? In that case, the father is a rasha by definition, because how do you produce a mamzer except by violating a serious law? And so you might have thought that perhaps the child does not have to respect his father. And so the Mishnah teaches no, he is chayav if he hits or curses his father. And is considered his child for all matters. In the case of that, mamzerut. However, this does not apply to someone who has a child from a shivcha Kena'anit or from a non-Jew, because again, there the definition goes by the mother, and the child is not Jewish, and therefore, even if a person has a child from a non-Jew and he dies with no other children, his wife will still have to perform yibum, because that child is not going to inherit him, is not considered his future, is not going to continue his legacy, and therefore requires yibum in order to have a Jewish child who will continue his legacy. Okay, very interesting. So now we ask, Mikom makom latu yemai. I filled in already the blanks, but the Gemara has to figure it out on its own. So when we say Mikom makom, any type of brother, what type of brother is it including that would perform yibum? Amar Rav Yehuda latu ye. Mamzer is coming to include a brother even who is a mamzer, still performs yibum. Pishita achivu, of course. Now we say obviously it's his brother. Why not? What were you thinking? I was thinking we were to make a gezerah shava. We use this gezerah shava already previously to learn that it's only paternal brothers, not maternal brothers, because it says the word achim ke'yeshivu achim yachtav, and the children of Yaakov are all called achim, even though they're only paternal brothers. And so I might have thought that I can apply that gezerah shava also to this matter. Malalan kesherin velo pesulin, afkan kesherin velo pesulin, kamash malan. And just like they are all legitimate brothers. Although Yaakov had 4 wives, he was legally married to all of them, and they were not. None of them were erva, so none of the children are mamzerim. So to here, I might have thought that only legitimate kasher brothers can do yibum, but not pesulim, meaning mamzerim. So that's why I would have thought. So that's why the Mishnah has to teach us that, yes, to include even a mamzer brother performs yibum. And now we say ve'ema hachaname. Well, you actually gave me such a good convincing counter argument that maybe that should in fact be the case, and a mamzer should not be able to do yibum for his brother. And we say kevan de yibum mipatar and nipatar mizkak name zakik. The answer is because a child who is a mamzer will exempt the mother from the wife from performing yibum, right? Meaning, if a man has a child who is a mamzer, his wife, when he dies, she can go free. So since a mamzer works to free his father's wife, so too a mamzer can perform yibum. In other words, from the fact that the second half of the Mishnah includes a mamzer as a son, so the first half of the Mishnah should include a mamzer as a brother. Good. The Mishnah added another phrase, that is it is considered his brother for all matters. For what? What is that including? That when the father dies, that both brothers inherit, even the mamzer inherits, and also if the legitimate brother is a kohen, and the halacha is a kohen cannot become tameh for anyone except for his close relatives, including his brother. And in case you would have thought, oh wait, this guy's a mamzer, and maybe he can't become tameh, and the teaches yes, he can. A kohen can become tameh even for his mamzer brother. So now we ask pishita achivu. Isn't this obvious? It's his brother. Why would you think otherwise? Regarding to the tum'ah for a kohen, It says he cannot become tameh to anyone except for his flesh, who is close to, was related to. The word she'ero, which means flesh, that comes to include his wife. The Torah only specifies 6 close relatives: a father, a mother, sister, brother, son, daughter, that a kohen would become tameh to if any of those died, but does not mention wife. And so the rabbis come and say, well, obviously his wife he has is closer to ishtoki gufa, right? So she'ero, which means his own flesh. Yes, of course, that is included. A kohen can become tameh if his wife dies. Yet the pasuk also says, a couple of pasukim later says that Kohen should not become, a husband should not become tameh in a way that will profane himself. So this sounds like it's the opposite, that the pashat of the Pisukim is that a husband cannot, is going out of his way to say not so. So who is this husband who cannot become tameh? And the answer is yesh bal shemit tameh v'yesh bal she'en mit tameh. Some husbands can and some husbands can't. If their marriage is totally on the up and up, his wife is kosher for him to marry, then if she dies, her husband becomes tameh for him. But if ishto is pisula, it'll say she was a divorcee or halala, and he was not permitted to marry her in the first place. He has even an obligation to divorce her. Then if she dies, he cannot become tameh for her. And that's what that pasuk said. Okay, so now keeping that halacha in mind, so I might have thought to apply the same thing to a brother, that maybe a kohen can only become tameh to a kosher brother, a legitimate brother, but not a brother who is a mamzer. Just like he cannot become tameh for a wife who is pisula. Kamash malan, that's why the Mishnah teaches us that they are full brothers for everything. He can become tameh. Okay, once again, we asked, your counter argument was so good. Maybe you're right. Maybe he shouldn't become tameh for his mamzer brother. And we answer, hatam lapuke kayema v'achal who over there, in the case of a kohen and a divorcee or halala, he was supposed to dismiss her, divorce her. And so she, every second that they are continue to be together is a problem. And so that's why, since she should be dismissed if she dies, he does not become tameh to her. Whereas here, brothers are brothers forever. You can never undo that sibling relationship. And so therefore, even as mamzer, nothing, you can't divorce your brother. And so that's why it's that law of tumah does not apply to a brother, and a brother who's a mamzer. The kohen brother does become tameh for him. Next, someone has a brother who is not Jewish, does not perform yibum. Because regarding a Jewish Eved Ivri, who his master allows him to be with a shifcha Kanaanit while he is in servitude. So they will be together and they may have children. Once the Eved Ivri goes free, the pasuk says that the woman and her children remain with the master. The master owns them. And so the Eved Ivri can go free, but his wife and children do not have a right to go with him. What do we see from here? We see the principle of maternal lineage, that the definition of a status of a person goes by the mother. And so therefore, just like here, we see that it doesn't matter that it's his son, because it's from his shifcha Kanaanit, and the same would be true for a non-Jew also. Therefore, that would be the same that would apply to Yibum as well, that the Yibum can only be done by someone who is a brother and is Jewish. And his brother, who's not Jewish, cannot perform Yibum. Okay, ben and now we move to the second half of the Mishnah. It says someone who has a child and any type of child, the wife, if he dies, the wife is exempt from yibum because he has a child. So we ask again, what case are you including? Amar Rabbi Yehuda mamzer, to include a mamzer. This is one of the cases where the Mishnah is opaque and it seems to rely on the oral tradition of the teacher explaining what the Mishnah meant. The Mishnah makes it like a general category, and you have to fill in the blank based on the direct oral tradition of what it meant. Okay, my ta'ama adamar kera uben en lo ayen alav. Regarding yibum, it says you only do yibum if he has no son, no child. And en law, if you don't pronounce the n if you don't distinguish gutturals, so it can be pronounced ayin law or ayin law with that extra yod there, which means you should go and investigate. But before you do anything, before you allow yibum to happen, go investigate. Maybe this guy who died has some other child somewhere, maybe in a different country, a different family, who knows what happened. And so make sure, even including a mamzer, so that comes to include a mamzer, is considered a child to release the father's wife. V'chayav al makato. And furthermore, if mamzer strikes his father, he is liable. Amai karikan v'nasiba mechalo taor be'oseh ma'aseh amecha. Says, why is he liable? Why don't we derive a similar law from? There's another law regarding a nasi, right? The ruler or king. The special law that one may not curse the ruler, and the midrash already says that only applies to a person who follows Jewish law, whose deeds are according to the people. If the ruler acts correctly according to halacha, then it's prohibited to curse him. But if he's not evil, if he's a rasha, this king or ruler, then this prohibition does not apply. And so we can make a comparison, apply the same thing here, and say that the father of this mamzer is, by definition, a rasha. He engaged in illicit relations. And so therefore, maybe we should say that the child is permitted, or at least would not be liable if he hit his father. And we answer, and we borrow an answer to Rav Pinchas in the name of Rav Papa, who said, this is back in Masechet Chagiga, see if you remember, right? A case of a thief who returned the item and said, by the way, it's tahor, I made sure, right, that we trust him. How could you trust a thief? Well, he made teshuvah, Rav Pinchas in the name of Rav Papa said over there, so we trust him. So we're going to apply that principle here too, and we say, even though this person was a rasha, and he did something illegal and and caused a mamzer to be born, nevertheless, he repented since then. And because he repented, now if he does repent, then the child who is a mamzer is liable if he strikes or curses his father. And that's the explanation for the Mishnah. But we ask, V'hai bar teshuvahu v'hatenan Shimon ben Menasya omer ezehu me'ovat lo yuchal litzkon ze haba al ha'irva v'holid mimena mamzer. We ask a question because that we already learned once that the pasuk says something crooked that cannot be straightened. What does that refer to in Kohelet? Refers to someone who has illegal relations with an irva and causes a mamzer to be born. You say if they have illegal relations and do not have a child, well, then they sin, but they can do teshuvah and rectify it. But if they produce a child, then that mamzer is going to be a mamzer forever. And so what can they do? There's no way to fix the effect of his sin. And so here too, you should say it's not impossible for him to make teshuvah. And we answer, no, nevertheless, right now, he is following the laws of the people. Although you're right, it's true, he cannot make full teshuvah to the extent that the after effect of his sin will linger forever. But right now, and at least in terms of his own person, he is now following the law. And so the child who curses him or hits him would be liable, and so that takes effect here. This is a very interesting sugya because it's foundational for questions that come up when there are absentee or abusive parents, and then what is the obligation of those children in terms of respect or to mourn for them, and lots of different laws that involve both psychology and halacha, and so we can analyze this sugya for that important topic. Okay, and next we get to a question. Tenoda banan haba al achoto vehi bat eshet aviv Chayav mishum achoto u mishum bat eshet aviv. Someone who has relations with his sister, who is also his father's wife, his father's wife's daughter, will be liable on two counts. Number one, because of achoto, and also because of bat eshet aviv. Here is a picture of what this looks like. Yaakov is married to two women, and he has a son by one and a daughter by the other. So they are paternal siblings, right? So this is his half sister, and it's also his father's wife's daughter. And there are two different pisukim that prohibit this. And here are the two pisukim. It says, Arvat achotecha bat avicha o bat imecha moledet bait o moledet chutz lo tegale ervatan. This says that one's half-sister, paternal or maternal, is prohibited. So that's one prohibition, being his half-sister from his father. And the other pasuk, two pasukim later, says, Arvat bat eshet avicha, the daughter of your father's wife, even if it's not his own mother, is prohibited. It says, achotecha hi, she is in fact your sister, and it's this in this case would be stepsister, and that is a separate prohibition. Notice the word moledet avicha, born to your father. We'll discuss this as well. And so you see there's two pisukim, and so according to Rabbanan, one violates both was liable on two counts for this one act. That's Rabbanan. Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda Omer eno chayav ela mishum achoto bilbad velo mipnei bat eshet aviv. He says no, only one can apply. In this case, it is his sister, right? It's his half sister. That's the only one that applies. And the other prohibition of being is true. It is his father's wife's daughter. But that that prohibition would not apply in this case, and is only prohibited on one count. We will now bring the reasoning behind each side of this debate. So we ask, "My tamayu d'Rabbanan." What's the reason for Rabbanan who obligate two liabilities? Pasuk 9 is one prohibition, Ervat against your half sister. Ervat bat eshet avicha molet avicha achotecha hi, and the second one says that this is your one's father's wife's daughter, and so that is a second obligation that also applies. So lamali, why do I need the second one? Shema mina l'chayvo mishum achoto umishum bat eshet aviv. That's the two obligations, both his half sister and also his father's wife's daughter. Good. What's the reason for the Yehuda to say only one obligation? They're all are after all two pesukim. Amar kera achotecha hi mishum achoto ata mechayevo ve'i ata mechayevo mishum bat eshet aviv. In the second pasuk, which is about a father's wife's daughter, it adds this exclusionary term. She is your sister. She is your sister. So it sounds like only if she is your sister, then this there would be this first obligation, but not the second obligation. If she's your sister, then do not apply this obligation, this further liability here. So these extra words in this pasuk are actually limiting the application of a father's wife's daughter to be only if it's a father's wife's daughter who is not a sibling, then that would be the liability. But if she is a sibling, then the second pasuk does not apply to her. Good. Mishum achoto, right? It's only obligated as a half sister, but not as a father's wife's daughter. But Abanan, hi achotecha hi. So now to the rabbis, those extra words, achotecha hi, what are you doing? What are you going to do with them? This is something very interesting. Listen to this argument. My avdile miba elehu lechayevo lachoto bat aviv u bat imo lo mashen mazirin min hadin. We need those to know that one is obligated even to a full sister who was both his sister on his father's side and on his mother's side. And now, although you might think that would be obvious as a kal vachomer, we're actually going to learn from here an important principle that kal vachomer does not apply. We cannot use a kal vachomer to derive the warning or the punishment of one capital punishment to another case of capital punishment. So back to the Pesukim, this Pasuk says only a half sister is prohibited, and that would be capital punishment, right? Half sister from the father or half sister from the mother. That's it. I would not know from this Pesukim that a full sister was be similarly obligated. Now you can say, oh, it's kal vachomer. If a half sister is obligated, then certainly a full sister would be. That's included in a half sister. And so no, this word achotecha hi, this comes to include a full sister. And why do I need that? I learned from here that the Torah went out of its way to say a full sister so that I know the general rule that in all of the Torah, I cannot use a kal vachomer to derive capital punishment from one case to another. So that's a very important lesson. The reason for that is because, you know what, we don't want to kill someone based on logic. Although, you know, we tend to think that logic is absolute, but kal vachomer is not strictly, you know, A is greater than B in terms of numbers. And whenever you have two cases, you can always find some aspect that this case is more stringent than that case and the other is not. And so our logic is therefore faulty. We cannot trust it to go and kill a person based on it. So this is the origin of that law, that en mazhirin min hadin, and another places en onshin min hadin. Okay, well, how is the Yehuda going to respond to this? How does he know the rule that we do not bring capital punishment based on a kal vachomer? If it just said achotecha, I would have known that alone. Achotecha means full sister. The word he, lamali, why do we need also the word he? Mishum achotecha ata mechayevo v'i ata mechayevo mishum bat eshet aviv. The word he comes to limit and say in the case where it is a half sister and also the father's wife's daughter, that she is obligated only on one count and not two. Okay, Rabbanan, they can. What are you going to do with that? So you could just have the word achotecha. Why do you need he? I still need the word he. Because otherwise, I might have thought that maybe in general I don't have the rule that en onshin min hadin. Might have thought you could. How so? If I only had the word achotecha, I might have thought that comes to include a full sister. And why bother saying it if I can learn it from a kal vachomer? Well, sometimes the Torah does go the extra mile, and it bothers to write something that even though it's obvious and you could have figured it out. This is the opposite rule of that. The Torah is so parsed with words that every extra word has to mean something. This is the opposite rule. It could be a case where Torah says something extra just for emphasis and not that we should learn anything. So if I only had the word achotecha, I wouldn't necessarily know the rule. Therefore, katav rachamanahi, to say that this is something special here. That a full sister is prohibited, and I would not know that, even though I would know that from a kal vachomer. Nevertheless, we have to say it here in order to teach the rule that in general, you cannot add additional prohibitions of capital punishment based on a kal vachomer, because here you could have had a kal vachomer, and yet it goes ahead and says it. Good. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, im ken lekatbe rachamana lachotecha hi beidach kera. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, what are you going to say with that? Isn't that a good argument? He says, no, there is still an extra element here, which is the placement of these words, because after all, this achotecha hi, according to Rabbanan, you should put it up here in pasuk 9. And then you would have said, it would have read, your half sister from your father, or your half sister from your mother, or achotecha, your full sister. And then I would have had all in one place. And then I would have derived from there, well, then I know from half sister that a full sister is also, and says, no, that would be a kal vachomer. And it says achotecha hi to add that I do not derive laws from a kal vachomer. And so it would have all made sense if it was all in pasuk 9. Why is it instead placed in pasuk 11? Oh, that placement comes to limit the application of a father's wife's daughter to cases where it is not also a half sister. So therefore, it's only one obligation and not two. Good. And so now that we've figured out both sides, we still have something left open for Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Hi. Bat eshet avicha my avid lehem. What does he need the first pasuk for? After all, the second pasuk, Bat eshet avicha. What does he need that for? Right. After all, only the person will only be obligated on one count for a half sister, and not on the second count. So, what would this case? What does this pasuk add that I wouldn't know otherwise? And the answer is Meba'aleh mi sheyesh lo ishut le'avicha ba perat la'achot mishpacha vegoya she'en ishut le'avicha ba. And the answer is to include anyone who the father could marry. Then if he has a daughter with that person, even out of wedlock, that is still prohibited to a sibling. So a sibling where one of the siblings is where at least one of them was born out of wedlock, nevertheless the siblings are prohibited, and that comes to exclude perat la'achoto mishivcha vegoyash and ishut la'avicha ba. However, if there's someone who the father could not marry, and that would include a non-Jew, right? If someone goes and tries to do kiddushin with a non-Jew, it does not take effect, and therefore, if that father is with a non-Jew and has a non-Jewish child, then the father's son, Jewish son, cohabits with her, then he would not be liable as erva. Okay, ve'ema pedat la'achoto ma'anusa. Wait, why do you assume it's a non-Jew? Maybe it's the father's rape victim, and the rape victim, that is of someone who is excluded from this pasuk. And so you might think that a rape victim, if the brother takes her, then that would be the case that's not liable, and that's what's coming to exclude. No, that's impossible. We cannot say that because of this prior teaching of Rava. So let's see what Rava's teaching is. The point of Rava's teaching is going to be that there is that Arayot applies both to someone married and to case of someone born by rape or out of wedlock. One pasuk says someone's granddaughter is prohibited to him. But if I had only this pasuk, I would say, it says his granddaughter is prohibited, but his wife's granddaughter would be permitted because it doesn't say anything about it. However, there's another pasuk that you cannot reveal nakedness of a woman and her daughter, which means if you're married to one person, then her granddaughter, one's wife's granddaughter, is prohibited. So hakesad, on the one hand, the implication of the first pasuk, that's your granddaughter and not your wife's granddaughter. Wife's granddaughter would be permitted, but this pasuk says wife's granddaughter is prohibited explicitly. Hakesad. So how could we reconcile this? Kan be'onasin, kan benisuin. Is coming to tell me that. So one is talking about a rape victim, which that is prohibited. And the other pasuk is teaching me that through marriage is also prohibited. And so here's the point. Since we have these two pasukim teaching me that both a legitimate child and an illegitimate child are both considered adayot, both related to the father. So too, if we come back here, we cannot say that achoto me'anusa, that one sibling from father's rape victim would be permitted, because we already saw that there is no difference in that regard. Therefore, we end up with the conclusion that this pasuk about Eshet Avicha is coming to exclude only case of a sibling who is not Jewish. In that case, one would not be liable. And on the next daf, we will see a few more possibilities of what this pasuk can exclude. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ve'amen.